The judge chuckled, shaking his head as he peered down at the man standing before him. "You really think you can walk out of here just like that?" He scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. The courtroom was silent, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. But when the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge, not just any badge, the judge's smirk vanished, his face draining of all color. What happened next left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. But let's start from the beginning. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Judge Walter Langley, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and a smug demeanor, peered over his glasses at the defendant standing before him. Across the room stood David Carter, a tall, composed black man in his early 40s, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit. His posture was straight, his hands folded calmly in front of him, exuding quiet confidence. Yet the judge smirked as if he had already passed judgment before hearing a single word. "Mr. Carter," Langley began, his tone dripping with condescension. "I see you've chosen to represent yourself. Bold move. Are you sure you understand the complexities of the legal system?" The snickers from the court audience were subtle, but David could hear them. He let out a small breath, keeping his expression impassive. David had been wrongfully accused of obstruction of justice, a charge that held no real weight, but one that could ruin reputations if not handled properly. The judge, clearly prejudiced, was making it his personal mission to undermine him at every turn. "Your Honor," David responded, his voice even and steady, "I am well aware of my rights and my ability to defend myself." Langley chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, this should be interesting." As the hearing proceeded, it became clear that Langley was doing everything in his power to humiliate David. He cut him off mid-sentence, dismissed his objections, and even exaggerated the severity of the charges. But David remained unshaken. He knew something the judge did not, and when the right moment came, he would make sure the entire courtroom knew it too. The trial dragged on, with Judge Langley making a mockery of the proceedings. Each time David presented evidence to dismiss the charges, the judge found a way to brush it aside. "This is a waste of the court's time," Langley scoffed. "Unless you have anything of real value to say, Mr. Carter, I suggest we move forward with sentencing." David's jaw clenched. The arrogance was astounding. Langley wasn't even trying to hide his bias. But instead of reacting emotionally, David reached into his pocket, slowly pulling out a leather badge case. "Actually, Your Honor, there's something you might find very valuable," David said, his voice controlled but firm. He flipped open the case, revealing an unmistakable golden badge with bold letters across the top, "United States Secret Service." The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Langley's face went ghostly pale. His eyes darted between the badge and David's face, his mouth slightly open but no words forming. The audience, who had been enjoying the judge's performance, now sat frozen, realization dawning on them all at once. David placed the badge down on the podium for everyone to see. "I've spent the last 20 years protecting presidents, national leaders, and this country's highest institutions of justice. And yet, I find myself standing here, accused of a fabricated crime, while you mock and belittle me." His gaze locked onto Langley's. "Tell me, Judge, do you still think I don't understand the legal system?" The tension in the room skyrocketed. Langley cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The prosecutor, who had been riding on the judge's favoritism, suddenly found his confidence wavering. The entire case had just taken a drastic turn. Judge Langley struggled to regain his composure. "Mr. Carter, he stammered, but David held up a hand. "I would like to submit a formal complaint against this court for judicial misconduct," David said, his voice carrying authority that could not be ignored. "Your Honor has repeatedly demonstrated prejudice and an unwillingness to conduct a fair trial. That alone is enough to disqualify you from overseeing these proceedings." The audience shifted uncomfortably.
Even the stenographer hesitated, her fingers momentarily frozen over the keyboard. No one had ever seen a judge this visibly shaken in his own courtroom. Langley's fingers twitched as he clenched his gavel. I was simply ensuring proper procedure was followed," he weakly offered. David's eyes narrowed. "Improper procedure, intimidation, and obstruction of justice," he countered. "I'm quite familiar with these terms, perhaps more than you anticipated." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor sank into his chair, understanding that any further action against David would be disastrous. The case had become a national embarrassment before it even reached a verdict. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and 2 officials in dark suits entered. They exchanged glances with David, then turned to the judge. "Judge Langley," one of them said firmly, "we need to have a word with you, immediately." The gavel slipped from Langley's hand, hitting the desk with a dull thud. His career, his power, everything he had built was crumbling before him. David straightened his tie, exuding the same composed demeanor he had maintained from the start. He turned to the courtroom, glancing at the prosecutor, the jury, and the onlookers who had eagerly anticipated his downfall. "This hearing is over," he said simply, and walked out, leaving Judge Langley to face his long overdue reckoning.